Yeah, good morning, everybody. I hope you're all very well. And welcome to this workshop that we're going to do on the poetry of Eavan Boland. Now, very importantly, hopefully you can see my screen. I'm sure you can, and hopefully you can hear me. And we have the chat open as well. And you can throw a few questions at me as we go through the class. A couple of things before we get going. In terms of, a few of you sent me questions following Wednesday evening's class on the chat, and I'll get back to you over the weekend. I'll sit down for half an hour with a cup of coffee and reply to some of those emails. So if you're waiting for me, don't worry. I tend to be very good at getting back, just not immediately. Okay, so the schedule is we've got 2 hours. We'll take a little break on the hour, about 5 to 11. And I'm going to just do in the first hour, kind of a revision of the key elements of Boland's poetry. And then the second hour, really dig down into like, okay, I know the stuff, Paul, but why am I continually getting H4s or even H5s? Or if my aim is to get H2s or H1s, why am I getting H3s? So we're going to look at some sample responses written by me, but also written by students. Obviously anonymous. Nobody will know whose work this is. And I'm going to break down and do a critique of that work. I think that will be extremely useful. Well, I hope you find that extremely useful. Now, for the first few minutes, I just want to show you a mock exam. So why did I pick 2021? Well, 2021 was the last year that Boland was up for examination. And what I want to do, I want to spend just a few minutes settling you down as these papers approach, and just reminding you of what you already know about the mock exams. So this is an Examcraft mock. Don't forget there are two companies really that in Ireland produce mock exams, the Examcraft and Dublin Examining Board. Sometimes schools do their own, but they're often modelled on these. This is 2021. This is the paper one. And again, just to show you, there's the first text. They give you a little bit of an introduction. That's a great book, by the way. And then you have your A-B questions. And we've discussed already in paper. Hopefully you're watching the paper one classes on the Monday. But the style question there at the end, Tim Marshall's book, Divided, Why We're Living in an Age of Walls, has been described as an eye-opener and thought-provoking. And they want 4 elements of the writer's style that contribute to making it eye-opening or thought-provoking. Gorgeous question. Broad as broad can be. You can bring in anything you see in terms of persuasive language, language of information, giving facts, narrative techniques, use of anecdotes, use of imagery, just repetition, rhetorical questions. There's just so many things you could say there. So again, nice question. With the question B, I'm not going to read all this, by the way. I want to get to the paper too. But just with the question B's, don't forget, there's always the 4 instructions with a question B. So there's the first one is your umbrella task. So it's a blog post. People get too obsessed about like what the specifics are. A blog post is simply a piece of writing which addresses an audience. It's not. It's almost exactly the same as an article for a website or an article for a newspaper or for a magazine. Okay, it's just that you're going to have a broad audience. That's the crucial thing. And this one was entitled "Identity Crisis." In your blog post, you should, and then in the exam usually there'll be a colon where after should, and then there's 3 instruction verbs. So consider how past forms of our cultural identity, some challenges created in modern lifestyle changes and marketing, globalization, emigration, tourism to our perceived identity, and how our individual desire for a sense of belonging manifests itself in our behaviours. Now that was a terrible question B. It was one of those questions, you know those questions where when you read it, you get lost halfway through it? If you're reading the question and you lose the meaning of it halfway through it, remember, there's always another option. Always another option. Look at the other option. Look at this one, much simpler. Here's your umbrella task. It's an introduction to a book celebrating the best speeches of all time. Refer to the power of the spoken word as instruction number 1. Reference speeches of note and discuss the influence of technology on the impact of speeches. And then there's a 4th instruction, offer advice for someone writing a speech. Really, really, really easy. You could break it down. And that was much easier to follow than the first question B. So when you walk into that exam, My advice, again, this is not a paper one class, but have a look at your question 8 style questions. These questions here, number 3 first. I think that's a crucial consideration when you're choosing. When you pick your text that you're going to do based on the style, have a quick look at the second question because they can be tricky. Make sure it works for you. But I would always pick my question B first. That's just, it's not the correct thing to do. The only thing to do, I suppose, is probably the best way to put it. But it's a good approach. You look at your 3 question Bs, you read one of them like that one, and you go, "What the? I haven't got a clue what that means." So no panic, move away, go and find another one, and go, "Okay, that's the one I'm going to do." Then don't even look at that text question A, and make your choice for a question A between the other 2. Anyway, we're not here to discuss that. Of course, there's your composing. We're discussing this in the Monday classes. We're in the middle of going through how to write speeches at the moment, those Monday classes. But we're here. This is a paper 2 class today. And there, as you know, King Lear was on that year. I won't go to those questions now. But in the poetry that year, which is why we're here this morning, Eavan Boland was prescribed for study in 2021. She came up in all of the mock exams and she came up on the paper. Now, does that mean that it is guaranteed and certain and written in stone that she's going to come up this year? No, it doesn't. I always find it funny when one of the new things to do with this job this year is like posting things, on social media, which is not my comfort zone. But I always find it funny when you see people replying going, studying more than 2 poets is a waste of time. Just give me 1 second, sorry. It's my son. Okay, I don't know what that means. Just give me 1 second, okay? Bloody hell. Sorry, the vagaries of working from home. Now, so there's Boland, okay? So if Boland, so in terms of social media, you get these people posting things saying, well, I only studied 1 poet and I got a whatever. Best of luck, okay? I'm, for want of a better term, a professional. I would never steer you the wrong way. And the fact is that the maths is all you can rely on when it comes to studying poetry. And the maths is that you're going to get 5 poets on your paper. And of those 5 poets, that's 5 out of 8. And the maths say that 4, if you cover 4, you're guaranteed 1. Now, yes, I do agree that you can narrow that down probably to 3 where you're likely. And if you've been in my classes this year, that the 3 that I kind of have focused on with my full-time students are the 3 Irish poets, Boland, Kavanagh and Mann. And then I'm adding in Tracy K. Smith and I'm doing Hopkins as well. A lot of the lads, my students, will go, well, that's grand, sir, grand, but I'm just going to do 3 poets. That's up to you. But there is no guarantee that any particular poet is going to be on the paper. You have to get that into your head and be well prepared. Anyway, that's that speech over. So here was the Boland question from the mock exam the last time she was on in 2021. And it was a very easy question. And this is going to start us off. So Boland uses a variety of poetic techniques to produce evocative poems that offer interesting insights into human relationships. Now, it's a beautifully written question. Kudos to whoever was working for Examcraft that year writing that question. And it's just so typical of the type of question that you have to be able to answer. The bit in yellow, that's asking about her style of writing. Okay? It's asking about the way she writes. What does she do? It's making a statement. It's saying her poetry is evocative. Now, here's the question. Do you know what evocative means? If you don't know what evocative means, you need to ask me. Okay? And when they're not just saying, they don't want you to say her poetry is evocative. They want you to explain how she uses her skills as a writer I'll come to you now in a second, then, how she uses her skills as a writer to give to her poetry that evocative quality. Now that's when you're going to hear me now all this morning going on about analysis, critical thinking. That's the crucial thing. That question does not say summarize 4 poems by Eavan Boland. And the vast majority of candidates, when they go wrong because they don't answer the question, and therefore their work is not purposeful. The second thing to be aware of is the question will have a style element, but it will also have a thematic concerns element. And there is no doubt whatsoever that Boland's poetry is really concerned with human relationships. So it was an open goal question. And we're going to talk today about love and about the pomegranate and about this moment. And those poems are about her family and the relationship. I'm going to come to your questions now, Anne, about her family and about the complexities of her relationship with her husband and the challenges and rewarding aspects of her relationship with her child. Really, really, really easy. But then you broaden it out a bit. If you do a poem like The War Horse, or you do a poem like The Famine Road or Child of Our Time. I know there are other poems, but these are the ones I teach. She's talking about the relationship between people in a society in those poems, and about for example, bigotry, or about how we can have conflict between us, and that the consequences of that conflict can be terrible. So it's a lovely question. It's an open goal. But there's still going to be a huge, when I'm sitting down correcting a bundle of scripts, there's going to be a huge variety in the quality of the response from the candidates. Some candidates, your response will be quite superficial. Other candidates will go into deeper depth and show a greater variety. So when I go through this PowerPoint that I'm going to go through now, after I answer the questions that come up, brilliant. I'm glad somebody asked that question, Eva. I'm going to just answer these questions, and then I'm going to get into this PowerPoint, and I can come back to that mock, by the way, if you'd like me to. But when I go through this is, by the way, this is on the platform if you want to open it yourself at home. And by the way, it's on the platform as a PDF, and if you want to mark it up, as a PowerPoint. And what I realized this morning before class is, if you want to mark it up the way I'm going to mark it up, you have to save it as a PDF. Okay, just so you're aware. Or maybe you don't. I do on this on the iPad. Okay, so when I'm looking at this, we're thinking about the thematic concerns that the poet addresses, and they're not just about relationships. She also writes poetry which comments on the nature of the society she inhabits, and that puts her in the same bracket. So Kavanagh doesn't do that. Derek Mahan does do it. Sylvia Plath doesn't do that, unless you talk about I can't remember what it's called. She has one poem which comments on the society she lives in, but generally her work is introspective. But if you look at someone like Tracy K. Smith, she does do that. So be aware of that with these poets that you're preparing, that in terms of thematic concerns, there's going to be usually more than one, and often 2 or 3 that you can concern yourself with. Now, so let's get going into this. But first, I'm going to answer the questions, and I'm going to go from the bottom up. Okay, so I think it's pronounced Eva. So evocative means a poet's ability to stimulate our imagination. Okay, so if you're reading something, then a really good writer can make you forget that you're sitting wherever you're sitting in 2025 reading a book, and can draw you into the world of that book. They can evoke images. They can allow evoke provoke your senses, like allow you to see things you can't see, allow you to hear things you can't hear, for example, through the use of onomatopoeia, and so on. So evocative it's a reference to imagery, and it's a reference to atmosphere. And atmosphere, of course, has got to do with your senses as well. And that when that word is used in the question, they're talking about the way the poet is able to provoke our imagination. Famously, I think it was 2017, there was a question on Boland which asked about her work being both evocative and provocative. And provocative means makes you think. Okay, so thought-provoking, challenging. So hope that answers that question. Okay, now Anne, I'm going to deal with those two questions, okay? So first of all, Anne said, I've only covered Boland so far. Again, Anne, if your teacher allows you to walk into the mock exam with just one poet prepared, I think you can be guaranteed that poet's going to be on the paper. Because you can you can imagine the backlash if students walk into an examination for their mocks, for their Leaving Cert, and there's no question on, they haven't got any options. So I think, Annie, you can nearly take that at this stage as not a bad thing, because in your particular case, you can be certain that Boland is going to be on your mocks. I'd be very surprised if she's not. But then for everybody else, just in a general thing, Anne, your teacher, a lot of teachers do this, will hopefully then blitz the poetry after the mocks are over. But don't forget, you are a member of Grinds 360. So if you are in that unfortunate situation where the teacher's simply not doing the work, and unfortunately that does happen in rare cases, we have it all done for you. So if you go onto the platform and you look at the poetry section of the platform, there's everything you need to know about Tracy K. Smith, and there'll be master classes like this on her. There's everything you need to know about Mahan, and I've already covered Mahan in class, and there will be master classes. So we're going to look after you, Anne, okay? So don't worry too much about that in terms of the short term for the mocks, but certainly don't worry about just use the platform, engage with the platform. And you're going to see the knowledge checks that I designed for all of these poets to help you with and for every part of the course, to help you with your revision. They're going to be rolled out now in the next few weeks as well to add to the quality of the product. So hopefully you'll find that useful. And then the other question that you asked is about would I advise sticking to her. I would. Okay. What you don't want to do is stress yourself out over the mocks. So just think about it this way, Anne, right? If your teacher has only prepared one poet, that's down to your teacher. Okay? So you don't panic over that. So you have to be sure. Yeah. So you can see that, yeah. So you have to be sure. Look, whoever male or female, whatever that teacher, he or she, they're going to, get themselves in a bit of trouble if 5 poets come up and it's not Boland and you've only covered Boland. But that's not your issue. So you prepare the shit out of Boland if that's the only one your teacher has done, in the expectation that should come up. I hope that answers your question. Okay, let's get going. Loads of work to do. So just going to show you some questions, and then we're going to go through this slide by slide, okay? So remember, theme, all poetry is about the balance. All poetry questions is about the balance between what the poet says, thematic concerns, and how the poet writes, language. So you can expect a question to have a language element. Now, sometimes the language element isn't obvious, but if I'm discussing how effectively a poet delivers a theme or their observations, I'm going to bring in the language. My teacher has covered Platt was, no, Catherine, like Platt, I've got Platt covered on the platform, and the only reason I haven't covered her or haven't prioritized her is simply because, well, if I can be honest, Catherine, Platt's been on a lot recently and I'm kind of sick of her. But also, I'm not sick of her, she's a brilliant poet, but I just think that Boland being Irish and female gives her like a percentage greater chance than Platt or Dickinson. And Tracy K. Smith being American and new and never examined before gives her percentage. But that's pure speculation on my behalf, Catherine. If I was you, and if I had Boland and Platt ready, that's half of the female poets. You've got a very good chance of one of those 2 poets being on your paper. So don't just. I'm going to get myself in trouble now. So if the bosses are watching, apologies for this. It's not all about the exam. Like, this is where our system is completely broken. this is an education system. We're supposed to be producing educated young people. We don't study poetry. And I know you're all laughing at me going, give me the feck off, Paul, right? We're not meant to be studying poetry because it's on an exam. We're meant to be reading it because it's rewarding and interesting and, an expression of human existence and all of those things. So is there a value in reading a poet's work if that poet doesn't come up with the Leaving Cert? In my humble opinion, yes, there feckin' is. Okay, I'm off. I'm wasting bloody time here. It's 22 minutes past, right? So have a look, team and issue. So I'll mark the team bits in yellow, and I'll mark the language bits in green. This is the last time, Leaving Cert 2021. Discuss how effectively, in your opinion, Eavan Boland employs a range of narrative elements, that's a language element, to communicate a variety of thematic concerns. Ridiculously easy. Ridiculously easy. It was a great question that year. And again, the question won't always be that easy. Look at 2020. This is the question. Based on your reading of Boland's poetry, to what extent is your emotional response to her work heightened by her use of both provocative, so that's the theme part, and evocative imagery? Now, that was a absolutely disgusting question, because it said your emotional response. Well, is your intellectual response different? A lot of students were confused. I have to talk about how I feel. Well, yeah, go ahead. They've opened the door to how you feel. But the wording emotional response confused a lot of people. And of course, students found it difficult to differentiate between provocative and evocative. And as Eva just said there, not everybody would know what that word means. And this is why I'm saying to you, you cannot bank on just one poet, because that poet could happily come up. But if the wording of that question is not very nice, and as a little bit of insider knowledge for you lads, every single year, there's a question on the poetry and in the comparative, or a section in the comparative, where the questions are harder than in other sections. And that's a deliberate thing. Part of what you're being examined on is your ability to make good choices when you're picking questions. And it's not our fault as examiners if you've decided to narrow your range of choices by not doing the amount of work that you're supposed to have done. Now, again, that's not me preaching at you. That's what I'm saying to you is the attitude of the examiner. So it is absolutely possible. So it's interesting, isn't it, that she came up in 2020 and then they put her back on in 2021. That has happened in the past, where you have the same poet coming up year on year. So that's where people are saying, for example, with Platt, Catherine, that because Platt came up last year, she definitely won't be up this year. There's absolutely no basis for that. There's precedent for poets being put back to back. And actually, the Platt question last year was tricky. And the Boland question in 2020 was tricky. So they put her on in 2021 with an easy question. My point is, if you were doing your Leaving Cert and that question came up, you go, hooray, Boland. You're delighted with yourself. If you're doing your Leaving Cert and this question came up, I think you're much less likely to be happy. Now, I could be wrong, but you have to be able to drill down into the questions. This is a gorgeous question from 2017. Boland makes effective use of symbols and metaphors. Gorgeous. We're going to talk about that today. That's the language part of the question. To explore personal experiences. That's her, relationship with her daughter, with her mother and the Black Lives fan, or parents of Black Lives fan, with her husband in love, all those kind of things. And deliver penetrating truths about society. And again, I absolutely love that question. If I was preparing Boland, if I was you and I was doing my kind of my practice, I would keep on coming back to that question. I would keep that's a gorgeous question, because I think that no matter what they ask, if you've given yourself the challenge of thinking about that particular question, then you're much more likely to be able to cope with whatever question comes up. And then this one here, again, this is 2011. So to you, that's, that's a very long time ago, but it's you can see the questions very, very similar. If you're looking back on past questions, by the way, I wouldn't go past 2011 because they changed the way the questions are asked in 2011. Boland's reflective insights. So again, this is, that's the thematic element. Yeah. Are expressed through her precise use of language. And again, the door's wide open, very, very easy. what's precise, her characterization, her setting description, her use of symbols, her use of metaphors, her use of onomatopoeia, of light and darkness imagery, millions of things. So what's the message of the first part of this class? The message is that Boland has a good chance of coming up. And if she does, the question is not going to be write down a summary of 4 to 5 poems. The question is not going to be fill 4 to 5 pages of the booklet with ink and then get rewarded. The question is going to ask you to comment on a statement in relation to her poetry. And that statement most likely will have explicit reference to the way she writes and what she writes about. But the question might be a bit more subtle. So everything you write has to be purposeful, because we know in the marking scheme, purpose is the bar. P is the bar. It unlocks everything else. So everything you say has to be related to wording like that. Okay, I'm flying now. Those are the 6 poems by Boland that I teach. Okay, I've also, if you go, I don't know if you're aware of this, because Roland, my boss here at Grind 360, told me to let you know about this. I have, and I'm adding stuff to it now that I wasn't for ages, because when I started working with Grind 360, but when I was in Leesa Street, when COVID happened, and I still work in the other school I work in, Brunner, and COVID happened, and we had that remote learning issue. I set up a YouTube channel. So there's a YouTube channel called PMC Brunner. Okay, and if you PMC Brunner English, because there's a history one as well. And if you go there, there's loads of video content that I've recorded both this year and over the course of the last number of years. And I'm doing a little video every weekday now. I started on Thursday, where I'm just going through a poetry quote and a quote from King Lear or comparative in about 5 or 6 minutes, and saying the quote and explaining its meaning. So you might find that useful as well. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you're saying to me, if you put your hand up and you say, Paul, is there any chance you could do a video on, I don't know, the shadow doll or something like that? The answer is yes, and I will put it up on the platform, but it's more likely that you might look at, if you look at PMC Brunner, you might see video content there that I've done it from a couple of years ago that's not on our platform, because I just haven't transferred it across. Okay, so those are the poems I teach. And remember, there is no right poem to teach. Okay, but with Boland, you'll notice that what I have, if I've got Love, which is a deeply personal poem. We've got The Pomegranate, which is deeply personal. This Moment, which is deeply personal. And The Black Lace Fan, which is deeply personal. But then you've got Child of Our Time and The Famine Road, which are social commentary poems. So whatever poems you're doing, and for example, The Shadow Doll is a social commentary poem. For every poem you're doing, for every poet you're doing, think about the different thematic concerns. And if as I said earlier on, if it's someone like Smith or Boland or Derek Mann, and there's a kind of a mixture, they have some personal poems and some social commentary poems, I would certainly have one from each category in my 4 or 5 that I'm preparing. Okay, now you can prepare more than 5, but I don't think you need to. So these are the themes that she discusses. It's a wide variety of themes: marriage, parenthood, conflict, prejudice, injustice, political violence, infertility as a woman. So she does give voice to themes that are relevant to, particularly to the female experience in her poetry. The connection between the past and the present, I think, is a big one that a lot of people miss. We'll discuss that as we go through. And change and the transient nature of existence. And that reminds me to say something to you about Boland, but about all of these poets. What was I doing yesterday? Oh yeah, I was looking at Paula Mean's poem. Paula Mean is on, she's not on your year. I was taking 5th years. And I was talking to them about how there's a poem by Paula Mean, and I was talking about how it's deeply philosophical. And of course, then I'm on the bike going home. I cycle in and out of work every day, and I'm on the bike going home, and the bike's great for the old head. It kind of clears the day. And I was thinking about how I need to mention that about every single. Oh, thanks, guys. I need to mention that about every single poet. philosophy is thinking about life. And every poem that you read, like, makes you think about life. So if you were a kid and you read, Midterm Break or The Daffodils, like you weren't, getting into that in huge depth. But Midterm Break addresses the fragility of life. It addresses the absence of security that we have. It addresses the tight bonds of familial relationships. So it's deeply philosophical. So when you're reading a poem like The Pomegranate, that's about change. Yes, it's about parenthood, but it's also about change. When you're reading the poem Love, yes, it's about her marriage. So why does she bring in the story of Aeneas going down into the underground in it? Because it's about the idea of separation, and it's about the idea of evolution within relationships, and it's about the idea of communication, and those affect all of us, and that's why it's philosophical. So just be aware of those types of things. I'm flying now, we're moving, aren't we? Right, in terms of style, I want you to think about, I have that too big, sorry, language. Now, one of the things you can say about any poet, and Boland, this is certainly the case, is that her language in general is accessible. Okay, now, there is no question that you would be within your rights to put your hands up and say, Paul, I didn't find her accessible. Fine, that's okay. Paul, I didn't find Mahan accessible. Paul, I didn't find Kavanagh accessible. I found it really difficult to understand what he was going on about. And again, that's absolutely no problem. That's fine. Do that. Say that about a poet's work. But I do find that Boland's narrative approach, I think that Mahan's narrative approach, that storytelling approach that they have, is very straightforward. But so it's accessible. But once you get inside the door, there's depth. And the depth is brought about by her use of metaphor and symbolism. And you will get people saying to you that, well, a metaphor is different from a symbol. And you're right, but it's like a Venn diagram. Well, not like technically you're right, but it's a Venn diagram. They're very closely related. So a symbol can be a metaphor and a metaphor can be a symbol, but they're not always the same thing. Okay? They're not always the same thing. But she uses metaphor. Like, what does the famine road represent? Like when she writes love had the feather and muscle of wings, that's a metaphor. We're going to see it in a minute. But isn't it also a symbol? So don't get bogged down and nitpicking and worrying that teachers are, if you're aiming at the top end, that the examiner is going to go, oh, that's not quite they're just going to look for you to be engaged with the question and using the vocabulary of poetry in a way which shows information and thought. Remember this. I've said this to you in class loads of times, right? That has to be, you have to try and ban that from your thinking. That stands for fear of sounding stupid. As long as what you're saying in your head is on the question, an aspect of the question, and as long as it's supported by evidence from a poem, then it's interesting to me. So many students don't write things down because they might have an atmosphere in the class where having an opinion is shot down. The whole point of English as a subject to teach in school at secondary level is not to make you literate. By the time most students get to 99% of students get to first year, you're literate. It's about teaching critical thinking, and critical thinking means having ideas. I mentioned in one, I think it was the Monday class, about this thing that I'm doing. You'll see the first one today. I haven't figured out. I was trying to figure out where I was going to post it, because if I post it on the Grinds 360 platform, only you guys can see it. But I think if people download the app to be able to see. But anyway, I'm doing this thing. I keep on getting asked to recommend books to read. So I'm doing this thing where every week I'm going to recommend a book. And the first book I'm going to recommend, you'll see the video going up today, is on, and it'll go on the YouTube channel, and we put it on the platform as well, is called Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed. It's an incredibly interesting book. And it's about the importance of failure. It's about the importance of being wrong, so that when you look at that failure and you analyze where you've been wrong, you can learn from that. And when you're writing, have a look at, tease out your ideas, and then reread your work. And again, it depends on, are you doing work to get it done, or are you doing work because you want to get better? But never be afraid of writing something because you think it sounds stupid, as long as in your head it's relevant to the question, and as long as you can back it up with a reference to a poem. Then you're in good order. So these are the important aspects of her poetry. I think the number one thing that you have to be aware with this poet is that she's a narrative poet. So when she explores the difficult nature of her relationship with her parents and of her parents' relationship with each other, she brings us to Paris. In the pre-war months, she creates an atmosphere of a storm, and then she shows us this blackbird on this sultry morning, and she tells us the story. She brings us to places, and through those stories, she explores her themes. These are crucial aspects of her style. Now, I'm obviously not going to go through each one of these quotes, but they're going to ask you about the way she writes. One of the features of Boland's poetry is her use of juxtaposition. And juxtaposition is deliberate and dramatic contrasts. And what I'm trying to do is give you the vocabulary to explain things here. So, what does juxtaposition do? It creates vivid images and is an effective way of communicating her thoughts, of communicating her ideas, of communicating her observations or her insights. So that's the kind of, if you struggle sometimes to articulate what you want to say, you'll see in my notes or in these, in examples like that, maybe you could try to incorporate that kind of phrasing in your analysis. I've been watching this whole Grind 360 thing, lads. Like, I don't recognize myself. I'm buzzing off it. But I'm watching my colleagues. I watched I don't. That sounds weird, doesn't it? I'm not watching them, but I click into the classes every once in a while. And again, I'm a huge fan of Michal, our amazing Irish teacher. But it's so interesting to see the difference between Irish as a language, the way it's what you have to do to learn, and English as a language subject and what you have to do to be successful. But there's loads of crossovers. And one of the things Michal is always talking about is the finding the right word. Finding that, as he called it, that H1 word, right? And sometimes in English it's the same thing, isn't it? You know the answer, but you struggle to articulate it. So maybe trying to incorporate some of the phrasing that you see in my notes might help you articulate those points. So let's pick a couple of examples of juxtaposition. So I'm going to start with the pomegranate, and I'm going to pick them from poems that I think a lot of you will have studied. So this is a great quote. If I was doing my Leaving Cert and I was preparing Boland, I would learn that quote. Okay? And don't forget, in the second half of this class, we're going to be getting into how to use them to answer questions. But I would certainly learn that quote. So what have you got there? What's the juxtaposition? Well, you have grief and you have gift. So one, a very negative connotation, one, a very positive connotation. And the juxtaposition is highlighted by the alliteration of the G sound. Now, in that particular line, what she's saying is, I don't want to let my daughter go because I love her and the world is a dangerous place out there. And my instinct as a parent is to protect her. If you know the poem, you know that, right? But I also know that if I try to hold her back from the world, then I will damage our relationship and I will damage the one gift that any parent can give their child, which is the gift of love. So in that very simple line, remember I said about accessible language? Just count the words, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And of those 10 words, 2 of them have more than one syllable. So the language there is monosyllabic, and very much deliberately so, because she wants the line to stand out, to pop off the page. So the juxtaposition of gift and grief, the use of very simple, mostly monosyllabic accessible language, the use of the alliteration of the G, it all brings our attention as readers to that line. And in that line, she's making a point which is personal to her, but is also philosophical. If I don't let my kid go out and experience the world, if I think of myself and my needs first, then I damage that relationship. That's philosophical. It's thought-provoking. It's interesting. So we have her use of language on the one hand, we have deeply personal observations, but we also have then the broader philosophical observations which impact or which are relevant to everybody's life. Now, the next one I want to show you is, I'm just looking here, I should have, that's when I was putting this together, I used, on PowerPoint, you can, there's a design, but anyway, I should have put these in the one thing. So that's one quote, and that's one quote. Now, I've discussed both those quotes. You know those videos I said I'm putting up on YouTube? So on Thursday and Friday, I discussed both those quotes. So I won't go into those now. But let's have a look at this one here, right? I'll do two more for juxtaposition. Shit, this last might go on a bit longer. Sorry, Sanjeev. Now, so look at this one from Love. She refers to a life they had shared. Excuse me. Shared and lost. A life they had shared and lost. 7 words, 7 syllables. Again, it's no coincidence. So we have the juxtaposition of togetherness, and then that's lost, separation. So that's really, really striking, okay? And the language is simple. In that particular example, she's talking about Aeneas, that figure. Again, all of this, don't forget, the reason I'm not on here going through poem by poem, explaining the poems, because that's already done. That's on the platform for you. Go to school on Monday morning, be that person, put your earphones in, listen to me talking about love so you can get a grip on that poem if you haven't done it. You can take, there's so much time to do revision. It doesn't have to be sitting at a desk, right? It doesn't have to be with your 27 highlighters and making loads of notes. You can use a technology. But here we have this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous reference to the story of Aeneas. That's the classical allusions that we're going to come to in a minute. And her saying, Aeneas and his comrades were so close, but then they were separated. And she uses that juxtaposition between a life you've shared together, so intimacy, and lost, so separation, as a way of referring to how she feels about her marriage with her husband. That in the old days, they were really, really tight, but time has moved on, the relationship has evolved, and she feels that they're moving away from each other. So very, very clever. So have a look at that as a sample of the way, juxtaposition as an example of how you can talk about her style of language. Now, I'm lashing through this now, okay? Next. I'd mentioned the connection between the past and present, okay? And that is a key thematic concern in her poetry. I think it's a defining thematic concern, the connection between the past and the present. And again, here is something that you could say about that if you're writing about it in an essay and it's relevant to the question. She's interested about how past events inform present reality and about how the present influences the future. This means that her poets also contain time shifts where she moves when she's thinking. Her work is often deeply reflective. So she's thinking about past events, and it's a notable feature of her writing. So let's go around the circle here. The past is an empty cafe terrace. That's from the Black Lace Fan my mother gave me. And in that poem, she's sitting there in her kitchen, and it's in the 1990s, and she's thinking about her parents and when they met in 1939 in Paris. And she's connected to that place because she knows that meeting of her parents. You ever think about that when your parents first met? And if sliding doors moment, if something happened and they hadn't met, you wouldn't exist. And she's talking about that connection between her existence at that moment and that event in the past. That we don't live in isolation, that there is a connection between the past and the present. I know the poems you pick. I presume it's pick. I'm familiar with the term ick as well. For the exam, depends on the question, but are there any 1 or 2 poems you strongly recommend using on the day? Yes, there are. And again, I hate saying this because some of you might go, my teacher didn't do that poem. When it comes to Boland, my 2 core poems are Love and The Famine Road. So Alicia, that's my opinion. I'm allowed to have it, and it doesn't have to be the same choice for you. But for me, I would say, yeah, just having a crack. So really, really important. Love and the famine road. They'd be my two that I build my essays around. I always build my essays around those two because the fact that they're just really good examples of how in one of them she uses her poetry to explore very personal issues in a very candid, open, honest way. And in the other one, she uses her poetry in like a polemic, you'll see this word in a few minutes, in a polemical way to discuss difficult social issues. And also, by the way, in both of those poems, you have that connection between the past and the present. Okay? Let me see. Yeah, this is a good example. So this is from the poem Love. Okay? She's if you know the poem Love, and again, if you don't, I'm not, the purpose this morning, I always think 2 hours is loads of time. It's never enough time with me. I'm a terrible spoofer or waffler. In the poem Love, the story begins with herself and her husband are revisiting a place they used to live in Iowa, in the kind of Midwest of the United States. And she says, dark falls in this Midwestern town where, I love it, where we once, and once even though there's no W, it is alliterative. It just makes that line stand out because it's harder to say it with the alliteration. You have to watch your enunciation of the words. In this Midwestern town where we once lived when myths collided. And there she is. She's in this place at this time, but she's looking back. And she's looking back at a time when something extraordinary happened. And by the way, if you're talking about her as a storyteller, if they ask you about being a narrative writer, and you've watched any of the, I haven't done short story writing yet on the paper one classes, but it's next after I finish the speech writing. One of the things that all good narrative writers do, in fact, all good writers do, is they create an engaging opening. And if you look at Boland's poems, they all have kind of very striking opening lines. That's a great opening because it makes you go, what? What do you mean when myths collided? And then you're drawn in and it makes you curious. And of course, she's talking about her story as a human being living in the 20th century. And she's talking about the story of Aeneas from classical mythology, and about how she realized then that, we're not that different from people in the past. So the connection between the past and present is evident in her poetry. This is the other great quote from Love. I am your wife. It was years ago. Our child was healed. We love each other still. And again, do you know what's happening about there? Look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 words. And only one of them has 2 syllables. So again, this feature of her work, this monosyllabic language, given the work a directness, a power, a striking quality. And it is, so there is that thing that poem Love can be slightly difficult. There's a couple of stanzas where she describes Aeneas going into the underground and you go, okay, well, I have to figure out what that means. So it's thought-provoking and challenging. But then at other times, her language is deliberately straightforward, deliberately monosyllabic, because she wants to deliver the message clearly. So that's a great example of that, okay? And there, again, connection between the past and present. And don't forget, I haven't got it here because this is from the Pomegranate. I haven't got it here because I'm going to talk about it later in another slide. But think about, just because Leisha asked that question, in the Famine Road, if you look at the structure of the Famine Road, and don't forget, I've on the platform today, I've put up the Boland notes again. I think you've already got them and they're in the book. But for those of you who haven't got the book, they're on the platform, the summaries. They're there somewhere. That's them there. When you look at the Famine Road, is there any chance you can stay on this call for about 5 hours? Sorry, I'm going to get myself fired. You know the way she does that thing where you have like 1840s, 1980s, or 1970s, I never know what decade it is, the second half of the 20th century, mid 19th century, late 20th century. She does that thing, the sequencing of the stanzas. She intersperses the past and the present, the past and the present, the past and the present. And Alicia, again, that's another reason why that's a great poem to do, just technically, because just doing that means that she's showing those connections. Another topic you could talk about. By the way, when I say paragraph topic, I don't mean that you necessarily go idea by idea. You can, but I mean, these are all just ideas when you're discussing a poem that you can incorporate into the poem. And remember, if your teacher tells you have to go chronologically, you have to take a chronological approach. At the beginning of the poem, she says this, and then she says this, and then she says this. If your teacher tells you that there's an expectation that you're going to give a detailed summary of the poem, that's wrong. Okay? The expectation is that you're going to display learning. Now, to be fair, again, talking about a video that Mihal posted on TikTok or whatever. I watched it yesterday, and he was talking about the poetry in the Irish, and he said there's a question 3, in which I think he called it copy and paste. You can just it's predictable question. You can learn and write it down, and it'll pick you up enough marks nearly to pass. And that is the case with English as well here. So if you're somebody who's really struggling and you just go in and you summarize the poems, you'll pass. But I don't think any of us want to just get H6s. We want to be getting up above the 5s, into the 4s, and then pushing for those 3s, 2s, and 1s. So I'm always thinking about the guy who's stuck at that glass ceiling on the 4 and wants to get into the 3, 2, and 1, or the student who's she's really diligent and she's hard working, she knows the poems and she doesn't. She's frustrated because she keeps on getting the 3 and she wants the 2. Maybe you're telling me things I don't need to know. You're giving too much summary, not enough analysis. Okay, the experience of a woman is something which is and an Irish woman is something which is distinctive about her poetry. Her poetic appeal is broad, and she does not deal with exclusively feminist issues, but her poems do offer an insight into the experiences of a modern Irish woman that is both interesting and thought-provoking. And there's another phrase that you can use if you want to, and there's loads and loads and loads of examples. And again, they're all in the poems summaries. I'll pick 1 or 2 examples. What will I go for? I've mentioned love already. I've mentioned the pomegranate already. Let's talk about this moment. This moment is, it's my favourite Boland poem. And it didn't used to be. And then I became a parent. And obviously I'm a bloke, so I'm a father. Boland is a mother. But in that poem, this moment, she does capture the golden nature of having a child that you love. And she gives expression to that in this poem, where she describes herself in the third person. A woman leans down to catch a child who runs into her arms this moment. And there, in that very simple image, that cinematic image, because when you read it, you can see it. You can see the child running and the mother holding her. You have everything that she wants to say about the connection between the parent and the child, about the love the parent feels for the child, about the absolute sense of passionate desire that the parent has to keep the child safe. It's all there. And again, it's delivered in a narrative style with very clear language, nothing complicated, nothing difficult. But that is also an example of symbolism. The other poem, of course, and I know I've mentioned it a few times, The Famine Road. This idea at the end of The Famine Road, where the question is asked, barren, never to know the load of his child in you, what is your body now, if not a famine road? Again, the use of symbolism, again, the use of a narrative approach with the character of this woman who's been told she can't have children, but also giving voice to the experiences of women in a society where those experiences were largely neglected, and in that particular poem, in a society where the needs of women or the treatment of particular medical needs which are to do with women were neglected because the medical profession was dominated by men. So a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant aspect of her poetry. The Famine Road is a great example of that. This Moment is a great example of that. And so is The Pomegranate, which I think is a great poem if you're talking about that aspect of her poetry. I'm going to take a break in a minute because, not for me, to be honest with you, I'd like to keep going, but I know you're probably, I'll give you a 5 minute break in a minute, but just let's do this one. I want to mention this word here, polemical. At times her work is polemical. So what does that mean? Well, it means that, yes, you can describe her work as lyric poetry. And lyric poetry means not lyrical. Lyrical and lyric, I hate the term lyric poetry because it confuses the shit out of people. Lyric poetry essentially means poetry that's inspired by and reflects your own life and experiences. And then, of course, you can have a musical quality as well. You know, the rhythm that poets create in their work. But lyric poetry is personal poetry. And there's no doubt that Boland's poems are inspired by her own life and experiences. But there's also no doubt that some of her poems offer insights into wider societal and political issues. In particular, she's interested in prejudice and how it results in avoidable and unnecessary suffering. And again, look, the core poem for that is The Famine Road. But here, I want to just talk about the brilliant Child of Our Time. Now, I don't know why that's like that. Anyway, something to do with the PowerPoint. Now, so in Child of Our Time, she's writing about the 1974 Dublin and Monaghan bombings, and I know you know that. Believe it or not, that's 50 years ago. How do I know that? Well, nearly 51 years ago. How do I know that? Because the Dublin and Monaghan bombings happened a couple of weeks after I was born. Okay? And again, if you don't know what the poem is about, have a look at it on the platform. But crucially, in that poem, she says that we as a society have failed. Our job, because a child was killed in the 2 children were killed in the bombing. She says our society, which has allowed conflict to grow and conflict to fester to the point where, you know, it's erupting in violence. Any society that allows its children to suffer like that is a society which has failed. Because our job is to look after children, and she captures that in the image of you know, we teaching children nursery rhymes and learning and playing and nurturing and all that kind of stuff. And then she says, using the plural personal pronoun, that we need to find for your sake, whose life our idle talk has cost, a new language, child of our time, our times have robbed your cradle. Now we'll talk about the symbolism in a couple of minutes, but the use of that plural personal pronoun, which I'm always talking about when I'm talking about speech writing, that creates a sense of inclusivity. And what she's doing is, what she including herself and all of the people in the society, she's including them in the guilt for the child's death. She's making everybody in the society culpable, and she's making a social and political point. If we talk about each other lazily, in other words, if we use the lazy language of prejudice and division, if we do that, if we allow ourselves to, if we allow the chasm of prejudice and isms to grow between us, then that has consequences. And the consequences are captured in that amazing and quite moving image of the robbed cradle. Why do we put a baby in a cradle? To keep them safe. They don't sleep in an ordinary bed because they roll out of it. So our duty is to keep a child safe. And when our society is riven by prejudice, when we allow the language of division, when we allow the language of hate to take hold, then we are failing our children. And my Genie Mac, that was written in 1974, 50 years ago, and doesn't it have a resonance with the modern world? Folks, I'm over time for this. I'll give you 5 minutes and lash your questions into the chat there, and we'll start again. And the plan is to get this finished and then look at some samples. I definitely want to show you some samples of student work, and then we'll see how much we get through between 10 and 12 o'clock. We'll take a very quick 5 minute break, okay? I'll leave the stream open. I'll just mute the mic, and you can pop your things into the questions or points or observations into the chat. Thank you. Now, guys, we're back, and I see two very good questions from Kirk and from Conal there. So I'll answer both of those questions in this hour. Well, I'll give you my insights into both of those questions in the next hour, okay? So let's keep going through this now really quickly. This is a Boland revision class. It's not an essay writing class, but we will come to that. Do you have any advice for using your time well during the poetry section of the exam? Yes, I do. Izzy, that's exactly the kind of reason why we're on this call, and I'm going to come to that I'm going to set myself the target by 1:15, okay? Now, so I've done that one. What's the next one? The next one is, the striking imagery. You always have to have your key images ready. Don't forget this is already in your mind map that you have in the book where I've got some of the images taken out. And look out for examples of simile, onomatopoeia, and so on and so forth. Great, like this is a brilliant metaphor, apple sweetened in the dark. If you don't know what it means, go and watch the video on this moment. I've already mentioned Our Times Robbed Your Cradle. The brilliant It Is Winter and the Stars Are Hidden in the Pomegranate. Again, learn some of these symbols, be able to explain that the symbols add depth to the poetry, make it more striking, make it challenging, make it thought-provoking, and because they challenge you to think, because you have to stop and figure out what the symbols mean, they add a resonance, make the poetry more impactful, more interesting, and so on. Yes, Jack, it's perfectly fine to jump between scenes. Teachers will often tell you to go scene by scene or line by line in a poem, because your teachers love you and they just want you to do well. And the fact is that the vast majority of students don't put the work in, don't put the practice in, and therefore when they try to go, when they try to take a non-linear approach in terms of chronology, it just gets jumbled and confused. But when you're a student who's good at English, when you know your stuff and you're confident in your paragraphing technique, and you've got a sense of how to go about writing essays, there's no requirement. You can go chronologically, you don't have to. Okay? Again, the teacher's just trying to make sure you don't confuse the examiner. I've mentioned the symbols. I would certainly learn the meaning of as many of these as possible. The feather and muscle of wings is from Love, Famine Road. We know you need to know what that means. The pomegranate, we know that one already. The titles of the poems are always symbolic. This is from Child of Our Time, and this is from Child of Our Time. Like, if you just knew, if you were, say, discussing each poem by poem, and you were able to discuss the symbolic meaning and significance of those titles and what they represent in terms of the thematic concerns of the poem, and how she's able to pick these really precise symbols that communicate with great directness and precision the points that she's making or the themes that she's conveying, examiner's just going to love you because you're engaged with the language. Like, again, I'm conscious of time. I don't want to go off topic here, but just understand who you're dealing with. Like, if I'm a hurling coach or a camogie coach, right? And Sarah turns up or Billy turns up for training and he's acting the maggot and he's not engaged or she's not engaged with the training. I'm not going to pick them for the team on the match on Sunday. Because if I'm a hurling coach, I love hurling and I take it really seriously. And when I see somebody just turning up with the hurl and not putting the effort in, my attitude to that person is, I'm going to train you because the guy's a community, but when it comes to looking after you or rewarding you, get stuffed. And the same thing goes, everybody that's correcting your exams is an English teacher. Now, how do you become an English teacher? Maybe it's because you've nothing. Anyway, I won't make that joke. 99% of people who teach English because they love it. They love the subject. And when they see somebody who's writing in a way which is not engaged and clearly, has made no effort really, then what are you going to do? You're going to reward them. Now, the kid who is making an effort, who I'm going to show you this in a minute, who does make mistakes but is engaged and is trying to show learning and also to show that their work is like purposeful, like the skills of English, like writing, essay writing, you're going to reward that kid every single time. So it's really important to get that into your head about you have an audience and your audience is an English teacher and you have to write to that audience. Anyway, another interesting thing, and I think this is very important for Boland, she writes about relationships. The parent-child relationship, the relationship between husband and wife, wider societal relationships, the relationships between a child, all those things are I was going to say a child, a citizen, and the wider society, but that's there. So that's the pomegranate. That's this moment. That's Black Lace fan my mother gave me. This is love. This is the famine road. This is child of our time. The shadow doll. There's loads of poems. War horse. There's for me, if I'm preparing Boland and I'm trying to kind of get connections between the poems, thematic connections, I'm looking at the relationships aspect of her work. I think that's core. If I'm looking at her work in terms of style, and I'm looking for connections between the poems, there's millions of connections, but I'd have examples of juxtaposition. I'd be able to explain what a narrative approach means, and I would learn some of those symbols and be able to explain how she uses it, so that when you're discussing poem A and then you move on to poem B, there's connections between the paragraphs, there's continuity links, and I think that's really important, Izzy, when you're looking at writing essays. Now, we're nearly at the end of this part. As a narrative poet, she does create clearly drawn settings and characters, and that narrative approach makes her work easy to read. And again, this is that kind of thing, remember I said earlier on, where if you struggle to put it into words yourself, you could maybe learn this and see if it works. The fact that she addresses the themes she is interested in through the medium of narrative writing or storytelling makes her work appealing and accessible. And there are some of the look at that, Suburban Street. That's the Dublin in me coming out there. Suburban Street. Apologise. Those are some of the setting descriptions. Just done. You can't talk about Boland without talking about the myths. And, I always think when I read... Now, it's probably because I'm such a massive fanboy of Patrick Kavanagh, who, if there was ever living proof of, Picasso would be a good example as well, of the fact that you don't have to be a very nice human being to create great art. Kavanagh is a very good example of that. But every time I look at like later 20th century Irish poets, I just keep on saying, like, these guys liked Kavanagh, and that idea of seeing in our ordinary existence the extraordinary that lies at the core of Kavanagh is evident in Boland, but Boland brings a new twist to it. Boland studied classics in Trinners for Winners. She studied in Trinity College and she studied Greek and Roman mythology. And she draws in these parallels between the stories of ancient Greece. And again, I would just look at the pomegranate and love for that. You don't need to write about this at length, but she brings those in, those references to Ceres and Persephone. And I remember a student said to me a while ago, and I just went, I love teaching. I never knew that. I never thought about that before. It never dawned on me. A student said to me, Paul, why is it that in that poem, The Pomegranate, she uses now we're only going to get this wrong. She uses the Roman word for the mother in that myth. Or is it the other way around? And the Greek word for the daughter in that myth. I think in the Greek version of the myth, it's Demeter and Persephone. And in the Roman one, it's Ceres and, is it Persephone? Or I can't remember. But I went, that's fucking brilliant. Because of course she does that on purpose. She didn't make a mistake. She's showing what was relevant to the Greeks is relevant to the Romans, and what was relevant to the Greek and the Romans is relevant to us. So we're all interconnected, as time goes by. So again, that adds to her the philosophical aspect of her poetry. And then finally, I'm going to come to questions now. The use of light and darkness imagery, and I'm going to show you some examples of light and darkness imagery, hopefully before the end of this class. But again, you'll see me referring to light and darkness imagery if you look at the video content that's already on the platform about Boland. So that's the end of that part. Yes, John, this class is being recorded and will be on the platform. Separate theme in each paragraph. Is there a need to link from paragraph to paragraph? There's always a need to link between paragraph to paragraph, Ella, and you're simply linking about the thematic concerns being interesting. And, as we said at the start, the wording could be a variety of thematic concerns. See that variety? So you're going to, and another thematic concern addressed is, the impact of the unforeseen impact of prejudice, and this is evident in the poem Child of Our Time, and off you go. So you can use the question to link your paragraphs as opposed to the topic in each poem, if that makes any sense. Okay? I hope that does make sense. Now, okay. Stressed. Now, I'm going to do something now, and I hope you find this in some way useful. So just let me show you this really quickly, right? So there is this document is on the platform. Now that's the Boland mind map. There's a better Boland mind map in the document that's also on the platform, the King Lear and poetry mind maps document. That's on. It's there. It's been there for ages. There's Elias Platt. I highly recommend you revise these documents. And somebody sent me an email the other day saying, could I record one of each one of them on King Lear? Absolutely. So there's the kind of more detailed Boland mind map, right? Okay, so you have a look at that. This one here, it's just a kind of a simplified version. But the main reason I gave it to you is because I've got some sample paragraphs here that I want to address. But I'm going to come to that in a minute. What I want to do now... Oh no, Alicia, like all this class is, I'm not like, I'm not, even saying the words, I'm not the world's expert in poetry. Far from it. I just love English. I just love this stuff. This is, to me, obviously it's work, but it never feels like work when I'm doing it. I absolutely love that. You will never find me happier than when I'm discussing a poem or discussing King Lear or discussing, the merits of Shawshank Redemption. But English is opinion. And what I would hope I'm doing for you here, Leisha, is giving you ideas. I would hope then you marry that to what your teacher says. And often what I say will contradict or will be a totally different interpretation of what your teacher says. Good. And then you think for yourself and you come up with your own ideas. And that's what we're trying to encourage here. And again, it goes back to the point I made at the start of this class. What are we doing here in terms of education? Are we trying to create a culture of young people who are afraid to be wrong and who are incapable of articulating themselves? English, the purpose of English is to give you insights into the power of language and to encourage you to learn how to express your own opinions. So it's about your own opinions, and you can't be punished. Your teacher you might write something. This has happened before. Great question, James. I'm going to come to that now. You might write something down. Your teacher might say about a poem, and your teacher might read that and go, "Well, he's getting a grind there," or "He's read that in a book, and I didn't say that in class." And you have where teachers go, "Well, that's wrong." But the teacher's not supposed to, and what is the examiner won't do that. Because one of the great things about marking the Leaving Cert is that it's really, really hard work, which is why I do it as irregularly as possible. But one of the great things about it is you read an essay written by a student, and I don't know where the student's from, and they make a point about a poem, and I never thought about that point before. I'm like, geez, that's brilliant. And then I mention that when I'm teaching the poem the next time. Or you read it and you go, Christ, that's an interesting approach to writing a comparative essay now. That's different from my approach, but it's valid, it's within the marking scheme, so I'll bring that in. So variety of approaches is fine. Now, what makes a quote worth learning? That's a brilliant question. So I'm just going to just make sure, yeah, okay. That's a brilliant question. Now, what makes a quote worth learning? Remember I mentioned that fella Matthew Syed. So he's a brilliant writer. And if there's one book by him that I would recommend above all others, Black Box Thinking is up there, but there's a book called Bounce. And it's about practice. And it's about the scientific proof that practice leads to improvement. But only if it's thoughtful, purposeful practice. Now, the same thing, I read in the book, oh, geez, this is so applicable to what I do as a job. The same thing applies, James, with learning quotation. What makes it worth learning? Can you use it to make a point? When it comes to poetry, the point should be about what the poet says and or how the poet writes. So, for example, if we take a Boland poem and we take the poem The Pomegranate, there's a quote in The Pomegranate, because I mentioned light and darkness imagery at the end of that part of this class, and there's a quote in The Pomegranate in which she says, "It is winter and the stars are hidden." Now, first of all, James, it's a really easy quote. It is winter and the stars are hidden. So it's 8 words. Again, you can comment on the language. So 8 words and very simple. 6 of the words are words of 1 syllable. So that monosyllabic directness. She's using nature imagery. So talking about the seasons, that's called pathetic fallacy. We associate winter with darkness and with the cold. So we associate winter with a time of suffering. So she's saying there, she could have written that line in June. She's talking about the nature of her relationship with her child, who is now a teenager, and it's difficult. Stars offer light in the darkness. Light in the darkness is emblematic of hope. So with the stars being hidden, she feels hopeless. So it conveys her despair. And that's all those things you can say about imagery. And it's about relationships. It's about her as a mother. So it gives expression to her, her identity as both a parent and as a woman. And it's about love, because when a parent is going through that difficult phase where a child is growing away from them and the parent has to let them go, that's hard. Now, there you go, James. That's what makes a quote worth learning. If you understand what it means, and it allows you to comment intelligently on the type of things that come up in questions. The same thing with poetry. I don't know if you noticed, but on the social media side of things, we've been trying to make these little videos to kind of give students tips on preparation. And I did my ones during the week, and I don't think the one on comparative is up yet. It will be, like, nobody cares about comparative, it seems. No, it's not up yet. But the kids are home, so I'm going to put the earphones back in. Blocks out the noise. Sorry. So a student asked me, what makes a key moment? And my point is, well, there's no list. The examiner doesn't have this hidden list. It's not like a safe somewhere. These are the lists of the key moments. And if the child mentions something about, or the student mentions something about a text, small things like these or whatever, a sieve, and it's not on this list, it's not a key moment. A key moment is any moment that you are able to explain is key in the light of the point that you're making. So just like there's no wrong quote to learn as long as it's useful to you, in the same way, there's no wrong key moment to refer to as long as it helps you make your point about the cultural context or about the general vision of viewpoint or about the theme that you're discussing in the light of the wording of the question. I hope that answers the question. Now, so as I said, I've sample paragraphs that I've written in the notes that I've given you. But I think this is going to be worth looking at. So this was written by a student, and I'm not going to read the whole essay, but I just want to comment on where students, when I'm reading an essay, what a student might be doing well and where students can improve. Okay? And this is not about, dissing people. It's about highlighting for you what I see when I'm marking a script. I think you might find it useful. Of course, I can't take work off you because there's literally thousands of you now. So that's not what I'm doing here. I'm not your full-time teacher. But as I've said before, sometimes people will submit work to me and say, you can use it like this. And that's a way of me pointing out where they can improve in their work. So here's the question that the student was answering. Discuss how effectively Boland uses, so do you know what that term means? A range of images. So why did I say range? to develop her themes and add drama to her poetry? Now, that was a really nice question, okay? And it has the language part, imagery, and it has the thematic part, develop her themes in a dramatic way. And kind of add drama is kind of a mixture of the two, okay? Develop your response with reference to poems by Eavan Boland on your course. So really, really interesting question. First of all, if you're asked, does somebody do something effectively? You have to think about what that means. So the effect of something is whether or not it is successful. If you have a purpose, if you aim to do something, so her aim is to use images to develop her themes in a dramatic way. Does she succeed in doing it? So what a lot of people will do is they'll just pay lip service to that phrase, effectively. And they'll say, and this is another example of her effective use of imagery. And here's another example of her, they might even vary their vocabulary of her powerful use of imagery, or this is another example of her memorable use of imagery. But you have to explain what makes it powerful, what makes it effective, and what the impact is, okay? Now, Connell asked about openings and closings. First thing about this opening, Connell, is it conforms to the KISS rules. So that stands for keep it short and simple. And I would make sure when I'm writing my openings, I keep them nice and brief. Let me read it for you. It's a decent opening. Eavan Boland's poetry is vast. Now I'm just going to remind myself of little things. And concerns itself with a range of themes and issues. From her more polemical poems, which cover conflict and injustice, to more personal poems which address relationships, love, marriage, and parenthood. Boland's skillful use of imagery and language is what especially helps her further develop themes and also add an element of drama to her poetry. Now, so this candidate is, I'm reading that and I'm going, okay, this candidate is going to struggle to exceed, depending on, sometimes the openings can be a bit ropey and then they get going and they're better. But you're reading this and you're going, okay, this candidate is going to be somewhere between the H4 and the H3 grade. H3 grade is absolutely possible, but it is unlikely that this candidate is going to get the H2, certainly the H1. So H3 is very good. So what's the student doing at the start? Well, the student is writing an effective opening paragraph. It's question facing. So they understand that P, or purpose, is the bar. Their opening paragraph contains a clear thesis. It says that she addresses a range of, she uses the phrase range about the themes and issues. That word is in the question about the images, but that's okay as well. But it talks about the themes. It says themes plural, and it talks about conflict and injustice. It talks about relationships, love, marriage, and parenthood. Marriage is actually misspelled as well. But you can see that she's done good preparation. She's on the question. And then whoever it is, there's another spelling error. Sorry, I didn't spot that. And then the student talks about language, skillful use of imagery. So again, that's good. That's on the question. And language helps her further develop her themes and adds an element of drama to her poetry. So that's what I mean by thesis. She's on the question. She's saying, yeah, I do think that the writer's use of language and imagery helps her explore her themes in a way that adds drama. So it's good in that sense. It's not overlong. It's good in that sense. And you can see that the student has done really good preparation. So they're able to talk knowledgeably about the content of the poet's work, and that's good. But there are limits. The expression is not bad, but it's not great either. This term vast it's the incorrect choice of word for what the poet is trying to say, for what the student is trying to say. Eavan Boland's poetry, these words here are superfluous. I would just take them out. Often students, superfluous means not required. Excuse me, often students overwrite their language. Like, you just need to tighten up and think about the flow of your work. And again, you might put your hand up and go, Paul, how do I do that? Read your work out loud. Get into the habit of writing a paragraph. It takes 5 minutes to write a paragraph, less than that. Writing a paragraph and then reading it out loud. And again, going back to a question I was asked earlier on about timing. Yeah, Izzy, do you have any advice for using your time well during the poetry section? Izzy, this is not just during the poetry section. It's throughout the exam. It's having a strategy for writing paragraphs. If you can practice writing paragraphs, and if you can just understand that all a paragraph is all an essay is an assembly of separate paragraphs, then you're going to get faster. And if you're sitting there sucking your pen going, what will I write next? It's because you're not thinking before you write. And if you're one of those people, not you, Izzy, but students, who says, oh, I haven't got time to plan, that is absolutely, if you have time management issues and you don't plan, the time management issues will not improve. If you are thinking about studying over the course of the next 5 months, one of the things you should build into your studying is to take, and you can do this, it takes 5 to 10 minutes twice a week, to pick a question, just pick a question and do a little bit of, okay, what would I say? I'll do this first, then that, and then I link this, and then I do that, and then I do that. And then what quotes would I use? I'd use that quote, that, and so on and so forth. And somebody else said a minute ago, how many quotes should be in a paragraph? We'll talk about that in a second. But if you have a decent strategy for writing paragraphs, you will get quicker. If you take the time to think about what you're going to say before you write, you will get quicker. Okay? Now, so those are things. And then the other thing the student needs to be aware of, right? So there's number one. I'm sure I saw more than that. There was somewhere else. Poems poetry fast and concerns itself with a range of themes and issues, from her more polemical poems, which cover conflict and injustice, to more personal poems. Oh yeah, there's number 2. And Parenthood, Boland's skillful. There's number 3. Those are what I wanted to point out. Okay, so there are 3 separate and distinct spelling errors. Now, those, no problem, Izzy. Those separate and distinct spelling errors, you don't lose even 1 mark for those. But if there's a 4th one, then you lose one of your 5 allocated mechanics marks. So be aware of that. This candidate here can spell. There's no issue here with spelling. And by the way, if you have a spelling and grammar waiver, do your best to be as clear as you possibly can. But you don't worry about those things because you're not going to be punished for them. Okay? But if I'm reading that and I'm going, okay, they've lost 3 of, in order to lose all of the marks for mechanics in a poetry essay, you have to make 20 separate and distinct spelling errors. Because for every 4, you deduct a mark. That's how it works. So that's exactly, see what I'm doing there? That's what I'm doing. I'm marking up the script like that. And I'm counting the amount of spelling errors. So the student hasn't lost any marks there yet, but it's likely they're going to lose mechanics marks unnecessarily. And all you have to do is just reread. Because maybe polemical was a term that they're going to misspell anyway. But they know how to spell marriage. And they know how to spell, well, you should know how to spell skillful. Skillful only has 2 L's, SKILFUL. No, Josh, I won't, that's not something I'll do. I won't put up a student's work. I'll put it up on the screen like this and go through it with you, but I don't think it's fair for me to put it up there then where it's downloadable. I hope you understand that that's fair. Now, so let's have a look at this piece of analysis, and I'm just conscious of time. So I'm going to show you two examples of student work. So this is the first one. Child of Our Time is the first poem that the student is writing about. Okay, so poem number 1. And I like the fact that the student starts off the first paragraph, the first development paragraph, with the topic sentence. Sorry, that's the wrong letter. The topic sentence, Child of Our Time, is one such poem where she demonstrates this use of imagery written by her as a response to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings that occurred during the Troubles, comma, she captures the horror of a photograph depicting a dead child, comma, victim to the bombing, comma, when she says, your broken image. Now, this hard-working student, but you can see why the work is, again, I'm reading this going, okay. And I'm reading every line and I'm assessing. And I'm going, okay, well, I can see the limitations in this student's work. I can also see the strengths. Okay, so a couple of things, right? The poem is not called Child of Our Times. The poem is called Child of Our Time. And it's unbelievable how many students write down the incorrect name of poems. Unbelievable. It's just, yeah, so that's one to avoid. Also, a little thing, you wouldn't lose any marks for it, but the time should have a capital T, okay? Now, look at this. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, nearly 8 lines, all one sentence. You can see the use of the comma repeatedly throughout that. And when I was reading that out loud, you could hear that the quality of the expression was limited. What does this student have to be aware of? There's, sometimes you'd say to students, especially if they're students who are struggling at higher level. Excuse me, that's my smoothie. Keep your sentences short. And then you read their work and the sentences are it's staccato. There's no variety. So I don't say that anymore. What I do say is the longer the sentence is, the analogy I used to give, I'll tell you how my mind works. I used to tell the story. So when I don't care. We'll get done what we can get done. And if you want me to do another one of these on another day to continue on, you let me know. I cycle in and out to work, as I mentioned, and I live in Lucan. And so I cycle off and home by Chapel Izzard down, at the side of the Phoenix Park. And one day there's a cycle lane, and then there's a path beside the cycle lane, and then there's a bus lane. And one day I was cycling home, and there was a person walking their dog along, and they had the dog on one of those, those leads that like the dog can, if it's whatever, the button is pressed, the dog can stretch out and explore. And I'm cycling, I'm always wary of these things because the dog can cut across the front of the bike, but it was miles ahead of me. Anyway, walking along, I'm cycling along, and I see, and the dog notices something out on the cycle path and goes out, and I'm going, oh, here we go. And then there's something that sniffs out on the road, and it steps out into the road, and bang, hit by a bus. Dead dog. Now, that's not a true story. That's not funny. It's not a true story. But I used to tell that story to get a bit of attention, because students, what happened to the dog? Because people care about the dog in the way they don't care about their sentences. What's the message? If the leash is shorter, you have more control over the dog, and you're less likely to have a disaster. The longer the sentence, the more difficult it is to control the sentence, and the more likely it is that you're going to write like that. And that's not bad, but it's limited. So do you get my point? There are times when you're out in the park or, where it's safe, and you can let the leash go. And you have control because you can see, what's going on. But most of the time, keeping it nice and short, keeping it nice and tight, that's going to keep you safe, keep their work under control. And that's what this problem with this student is. Now, I'm still liking this student because the student is on the question. The student is very purposeful. They're talking about the use of imagery. Okay? They're talking knowledgeably about the poem. They're talking about the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. They're talking about the fact that it was inspired by this photograph that she saw in the newspaper. And she uses and integrates quotation into her sentence. So this is not, this idea like you're either brilliant at English or you're shit. Like I almost never read an essay and go, the nicest thing I could ever write in a student's work is that's better than I could do. And I've written that in the past many times, but most of the time you're looking at it going, okay, we can see where the issues are here. So this candidate just needs to practice writing paragraphs and reread their work out loud. This candidate has all the knowledge. They've done the study. Their work is purposeful. They're writing an introduction. They're writing in paragraph form, so they're picking up coherence marks. But where I'm worried about them is in the language and in the mechanics area. So they're going to lose marks there. This image of a dead child is shocking. So that's very, very good, because it's the question was asked about effect of it, and there she's talking about the impact. So now this is commentary. I keep on saying the student is integrating commentary into the work. She blames idle talk. Again, very good integration of quotation. Discriminatory language, in other words, for the death of the child. And she pushes for society to learn a new language. And that's like, now we're getting to a point where this student, you can see they're in their groove now. And this is really very, very good here. And so how many quotes per paragraph? It depends on your approach, but that student so far has used 3 quotes, but they're not really long. The student has reached into the poem, learned these symbols, idle talk, new language, broken image, and she's integrating them into her discussion to change. Learned acts of violence like this are allowed to continue. Least active acts of violence. That's a little bit confusing there at the end. So that paragraph contains really the mixture I'm looking for when I'm reading the student's work. It is relevant to the question under discussion. It's informed by learning, both in terms of reference, the Dublin Hamon bombings, and direct quotation. There's 3 of them. The student is attempting to contextualise. Is the writing as clear as it possibly could be? That's the area to improve. And then the student goes on, and what I really like as well is they break. Now again, Leisha, that's a great question. Right. So, for example, you're saying, should this student explain what idle talk means? Is that what you don't have to respond? I presume that's what you mean, right? When she writes idle talk, she means no. Leisha, you don't, because if you look at this here, right, it says she blames idle talk, discriminatory language. So in the analysis, it's clear that you know what it means, and don't forget the examiner knows what it means, and it's as long as your use of the quote is within the context of a point you're making, which is logical, well then no, you don't have to explain exactly what the quote means, because it should be implicit what the quote means from the context of your use of the quote. How are we doing? Is this okay? You following this okay? Hope that makes sense. Now, the other thing, because I want to move to another example now, the other thing the student does that I like here is she's written, or keep on saying she, I have no idea and nor is it relevant whether it's a female or a male student or whatever. She's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines on that poem. And the student is not finished writing about that poem. But it's not a very long paragraph, but it's long enough. And what they do is they've written 1 paragraph on that poem, and they're going to continue writing about that poem, but they're going to break it up into a separate, an A-B structure. Okay? And therefore, overall, that in terms of coherence of delivery, it makes the essay easier to read for me as an examiner. And those are some of the things that we're thinking about when we're looking at coherence of delivery. So that is, I think, a really useful thing for us to do, looking at not just what you need to know about Boland, that's what we've done, but also how a student presents their work in a way which is going to be rewarded or indeed be limited. Overall, I haven't got time. Overall, you read the whole essay, and the essay came out as a mid-range H3. Okay, when I PCLM'd it, a mid-range H3. Why? From the very first sentence to the very last sentence, I'm going to show you the CP now. From the very first sentence to the very last sentence, they were on the question. It was purposeful. There was a real sense of organisation. Their student wrote an opening, which was okay. There were things they could have done to make it, more interesting. The language was a bit limited. The spelling errors when you started reading the essay is very interesting. There were 3 in the opening paragraph, and then in the whole essay there were only 7. So the kind of anxiety that comes with spelling errors, or sorry, with the opening of an essay, you often see that's where spelling errors are. But then the whole essay, there were only 7 spelling errors. So they only lost 1 mechanics mark. The coherence was fine. Language was the issue. Just going to read the closing really quickly. Getting to read Eavan Boland's work has been a thought-provoking, when I say 7, they'll probably find I missed one, experience. The themes she presents, see that there? I wouldn't mark that as a spelling error. That's just an omission because they're under pressure. She presents causing you to ponder upon them more often than not to fully understand their depth and meaning. What made her work stand out to me is the vast range of work her work covers, from universal themes to more personal ones we can all relate to, and the quality of her language and imagery, which remain consistently vivid, original, and interesting. Little error there as well, but that's not a spelling error, that's an omission throughout all her poems. So she's written a conclusion which sums up and refers to the variety of thematic concerns and the imagery. Again, what we could see at the beginning of the essay is evident at the end of the essay. The student is purposeful, they're on task, but the quality of their expression is what's letting them down. And again, that's okay. Not everybody's going to get a H1. In fact, very, 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 very few people are going to get H1s. Not everybody's even going to get a H2. Very few people are. But the vast majority, and this is just my opinion, but it's based on nearly, 27 years of teaching Leaving Cert higher level English. The vast majority of students who get H4s could, if they just think about the way they say what they say, could push for H3s. As long as they have the foundations that this candidate has, and the foundations here are they know their material, they know how to paragraph, they're marrying relevant information, they're always on the question, their work is informed, it's clear, and again, as I said, the only thing they need to do is make sure that they write a bit more clearly. When is it appropriate to say I think? Now again, just to say, Leisha, I see those words there. Remember I said the word superfluous earlier on? I think far too many students use I think far too often. And actually, I know because I'm against the clock, I didn't point it out here. But the student here talks about to me and we can. I don't like the personal pronoun too often in an essay. I think, but you're not going to be necessarily punished for it. But sometimes it does characterize a student who the quality of their expression is more limited. So yeah, I think, like, if I say if I say I'm just trying to think of an example. If I say Eavan Boland was a talented writer, what does adding I think to the start of that sentence, what does it do? It doesn't do anything. I think doesn't add anything. In the same way, students write this. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong to do that. I'm saying don't do it very often. Like, it's another word. If somebody says to me, like, I mean this sincerely, I'm always immediately suspicious, going, why? Normally do you not mean things? Are you normally not being sincere? So when you say, in my opinion, I'm going, well, I use a bold word nearly 2 hours into this. Whose fucking opinion is it? Like, of course it's your opinion. So that's what I mean sometimes about. There's a fella who I worked with for years, and he's a professional writer. He's a journalist. And I'm always I'm a magpie. Like, I'm always trying to talk to people who are teachers. Like I mentioned, watching Michael's videos, or, learning from other teachers. And I mentioned reading things when I'm marking the exam that other students have written, that other teachers have, and I've gone, like, that's really interesting. But this guy, like, when we were talking about like the quality of expression, and students are always asking me how can you be better writer? It's like, it's the impossible question. And he said it is the impossible question, but like they need to go back to that Stephen King quote, which is read, read, read. Read as widely as you can. If you're not willing to read, then you're not going to be a better writer. That's the brilliant Stephen King's book on writing. He says that. But this I nearly said friend, not a friend. I'm going to come to that, Leisha, as well. Not a friend. A colleague said they need to just tighten up. They need to pay more attention to the quality of the way they write. And often when we write, we use more words than we need to, and our work is therefore lacks precision. And the best students, their work is very precise. No, Leisha, you're not marked kind of in a general sense on personal response. Sometimes a question will have a very obvious personal response element, and therefore that's part of the question. What you're being marked on is your ability to demonstrate knowledge and critically think or analyze your learning in the light of the question. This is not a personal response essay. Everything you write is from your point of view, but unless there's a personal response element in the question, it's simply your ability to analyze the learning, the study that you've done on the given poet, on King Lear, on whatever, in the light of the question. That's what you're being marked on. So no, there's not nowhere in the marking scheme does it say they have to do personal response. Now, last thing to do really quickly. I want to show you this candidate's work, okay? Here's the question. And don't forget, by the way, there are other samples written by me in the notes that I've given you, okay? But I just think this would be worth looking at as well. Discuss how effectively, there's that word. Boland uses a range of images to develop her themes and add drama. So same question, okay? So straight away you're looking at this and you're going, okay, little problem there. The plural, or sorry, the possessive apostrophe is missing. But listen to this and tell me, can you hear a difference between this and what we just read? Eavan Boland's poetry is appealing as she uses vivid emotional images to add drama to her personal experiences and also polemical issues from the past. Boland's, again you can see there, poems address difficult and complex issues and therefore are simply dramatic yet relatable. Motherhood, polemical issues, prejudice and love are themes Boland uses effectively. These themes are all portrayed in Love, Child of Our Time, The Famine Road and This Moment. Now, when you read that, is that better than the other one? And what I'm doing there is I'm trying to lead you, and you're probably going to go, yeah, it is. It's not. Different style of writing, but exactly this. And this is, people talk about the curve. Oh, Paul, the curve is not fair. I would have gotten a H2, but then the curve was applied. It's not. What does that work have in common with the work that we've just looked at? The student is purposeful. They're on the question. The student is demonstrating learning. They're talking about, there's a list there. This time they've listed the poems because their teacher has told them that you have to list the poems. You don't have to list the poems at the start, but there's no harm if you want to. That's fine. No harm at all. They're on the question. They're on images. They're showing language that they can comment on the imagery. They're on the issues that are addressed, difficult and complex. There's preparation being done, so you got to respect the student. But the quality of the expression is, again, the expression isn't as good as it could be. You asked about personal response. They open with Eavan Boland's poetry is appealing. Nowhere in the question does it ask about whether it's appealing. So straight away I'm going, well, is this going to be one of those essays where they just write what they want to write instead of answering the question? But then they get to images. The opening sentence is too long. It lacks impact. It lacks punch. It lacks directness. The student uses the term polemical once, twice there, and it feels a little bit that it's thrown in because they've learned that word, but they don't really know what that word means. And then they say it's simply dramatic yet relatable. Why does dramatic mean that it wouldn't usually be relatable? And what's simply doing there? What's the use of simply for? It simply doesn't add anything. So, what's my message? We've got 5 minutes now. We've looked at the fundamentals of Boland's poetry, and I know I love you all. Your Leave It Cert students are my favourite people on earth because it's tough, and I know you're under the cosh when it comes to, projects and oral preparation and points and pressure and all that stuff. I get it. I love this stuff, and I hope you like Boland's poetry. I hope you actually like her poetry, but it's easy. It's easy. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. To study something like this and go, right, I'm going to learn those quotes, or study this. Now, why is that? Is there not? Something gone wrong there now, is there? Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't know what's happening to the iPad there. Hang on, I'll just switch it off. Maybe that's a cue to finish the class. That's working. Okay, maybe that is the cue to finish the class. But anyway, sorry, the point I was making, so you go look at that, study the mind map, and you learn what you need to learn, and you'll know what you need to know. But that's only half of the work. It's making sure, go back to what we said at the start of the class, it's making sure that you pick the right question. So don't just see Boland and start writing on Boland. You should have an option. Now, I know one of you guys said that you won't have an option because your teacher just did Boland. But in general terms, you'll have an option. And you read the question carefully and say, okay, do I understand what those elements mean? And therefore, I'm going to go and do that question. If there's an element in the question that you're not quite sure of, don't forget, while you have to address all aspects of the question, you don't have to address them equally. Sometimes you look at a question and you'll say, do those two words not mean the same thing? And actually, often they do. Just have a look. If you want to have a look at the way the examiners are given leeway to interpret, just go onto examinations.ie and have a quick look through the marking scheme from last year, the instructions on a poet's work. If you want to have a look and see that, it gives you an idea. It's not really, really, really like kind of absolutely strict, as long as the work is purposeful. And you have to work on the quality of not just what you're saying, but how you're saying it. So yeah, I think that will do us for today. I don't know why that has happened, but I'll get it figured out by the time I'm doing my next class. So that's Boland. Did you find that useful? Will we do more of these as the year goes on different topics? I don't mind. I'm happy to do it on a Saturday morning between 10 and 12, and I'm happy to be driven by your demand and what you would like me to cover. And I hope that it helped with your preparation and you didn't feel that you wasted your morning. No worries, John. So I leave the chat open. I'm going to close off the class now. I'll leave the chat open. Oh yeah, one last thing I wanted to say. I did the Christmas classes and got lots of good feedback and really appreciate that. But I said I was going to respond to questions. Now, the only reason I haven't done that yet is because I have to figure out where it's going to be published. Because if I publish it on our platform, there were loads of people. We opened that class to everybody, and remember it crashed because so many people joined it. So I have to do the recording of responding to the questions, and I just have to check whether I've got to post that up on the YouTube channel or on the platform or both. But I'll do that at my leisure over the next couple of days. Cheers, folks. Have a lovely day, and don't forget, if you have any more questions or observations, throw them into the chat there. I'll keep looking at it. Okay. Cheers, bye. Bye-bye.